This video is the second part in solving trig equations with exact values. The reason this is the second video is we're going to, in this one, look at what happens when we've got a negative in here. That's important in this one. And again, I've swapped back to degrees for this one, just so you get the variety. You see degrees and you see radians examples. The big difference here is when we solved, particularly using the graph method with a negative in there, we kind of just bashed it into cos to the minus 1. We can't do that because our table that we drew at the start of this topic doesn't have negatives in it. So we are going to, for both methods this time, do a relative acute angle, and that is going to be cos to the minus 1 of 1 over root 2. We're going to look up our table, looking up where 1 over root 2 and cos fit. That is when we are dealing with 45 degrees. And I've put it in degrees because we started with degrees up there. Now for our two methods, let's do graphs first. Now this is where negative ones get tricky on the graph. And actually, it's one of the times where I think cast diagrams maybe are a little bit more obvious than what's going on a graph. Just labeling my graph up here. Now, what we've worked out here is what happens with positive 1 over root 2. So with positive 1 over root 2, which is about there, we're hitting the graph. That's when we come along by 45 degrees. But in our question, we were asked about negative 1 over root 2. Which is down here. So those two values. Now I'm looking at that bit of graph there and trying to match it up to thinking about this value. Well, this bit of graph there, if I can flip that first section of the graph around, hopefully you can see that matches with that first section of the graph there. Using that, I can see I need to do 180, and instead of doing plus 45 like I did here, I need to take 45 away. So I'm doing 180, take away 45. That leaves me with 135 degrees. Equally, this bit of graph here is identical to this bit here, except flipped over. So my other value is going to be at 180 plus 45, which is 225 degrees. That gives me my two values, and these are my two answers. The relative acute angle does not count because it gives us a positive 1 over root 2. Only these two angles here will give us a negative 1 over root 2. Working with my cast diagram, doing the same thing. And actually, I think this is possibly a bit easier in this particular circumstance. Cos is negative here and here. Well, this one here is 180. So that's 180, take away the relative acute angle for that section. Well, that gives us that answer. This one down here is always 180 plus the relative acute angle. So it involves a little bit less thinking using the cast diagram. This involves some understanding. This just bashes out the answers for us. So that is my example. Would like you to have a go with solving sine x equals minus a half between 0 and 360. So if you pause the video, have a go, then I'll run through that example in just a moment. Great, so if you paused and you've had a go, let's see what our answer is. So first thing, and doesn't matter which method you're using, we are going to do a relative acute angle, and we're just going to do that of a half. So sine to the minus 1 of a half, look up our table, that is 30 degrees. The graph in this case, it's a sine graph, that's 180, that's 360. Being at a half looks like that. So this section of the graph here is 30 degrees along. That gives us values of a half, but in the question we were interested in minus a half, which is down here. That's really not very well drawn. Apologies. Should be a wee bit further up. Now, which section of the graph matches that bit? Well, it's really that bit there is exactly the same. It's just on the downward instead of the upward. So we're coming 30 degrees along from 180. So our first angle that we're interested in is 180 plus 30, which is 210 degrees. We can work backwards, which that bit there matches that bit there. It just flipped over. So our other one we can see is 360, but we're coming back by our 30 degrees. So that is 330 degrees. Bring out a quick cast diagram just to see the other method. Sine is negative, which is there and there. This section is always 180 plus our relative acute angle. This section is always 360 minus our relative acute angle. So that is that one, and that one matches with that one. So the other method there. Anyway, whichever way you did it, these are our two examples. Again, two answers. This doesn't count, because if you did sine of 30 degrees, you get positive a half, which is not a solution to that equation, which needs to minus a half. So it's just these two down here. Great. So hopefully that gives you enough to have a go at the questions for yourself. And apologies, this video was a wee bit delayed because of the sound issues.